Okay, good evening everybody, welcome aboard. Let's do some learning Torah. It's a time where we need to increase as much as we can possibly in joyous learning of Torah. And joy that is generated through Torah that will encourage us keep on doing the right things that we're doing. Oh, we have to make sure to spotlight. And also, more importantly, to remind ourselves that even if we don't understand what's going on in the world around us, it doesn't mean we're free-falling, and not in the slightest. Instead, it means that Hashem has a master plan, and we need to strengthen what we need to do. It's been an interesting start to the week, but it's also been a big week on the calendar. It's a special week. It's a special week. There's a lot of good things to talk about. Both we start off from the Parshah, we go even before that, what's going on in the weekly calendar, and the lessons that we can learn from this week's Sedra are very, very powerful. Before I start, I want to say a major bracha to Hashem, from Hashem, a blessing to all of us, and the Torah that we're learning should be an aliyah for HaKadosh, Rav Tzvi, Ben Alexander HaKoyen, Hashem Yinkum Damei, Rabbi Kogan, and to his entire family, and to the family of Shluchim, and to all of Klal Yisrael and all the people around the world, that we should know that even if it looks like for a moment evil can seem to have a win over goodness, it's not the case. Hashem is in control every step of the way. We're going to increase our goodness to be able to continue doing the good things that we're doing and be able to draw more energy, more focus, more passion into the good things that we're doing, so the goodness that we're in, the light, the warmth that we're creating will not only drown out any sort of evil, but more importantly, it will give us the oomph to reach the destination in which we will see, as the Pasuk says, Oitcha Hashem Kenaftavi, when the time comes, we will understand and it will make sense even to our human mind, which will then be upgraded. Until then, we rest assured that Hashem knows what He's doing, and we take full action and we don't rest at all, making sure that we're doing our part in Hashem's master plan. So what's going on the calendar? What's happening this week? Some fascinating, important highlights that we should mention. Starting off with this week being Shabbos Mevarchim. This Shabbos will bless the new month, the month of Kislev, which is a very Hasidic month. The month of Kislev is jam-packed. Almost as many Yom Tovim days that you have in the month of Tishrei. In the general calendar, the Hasidic calendar is packed in the month of Kislev, full of days of celebration, of joy. Many of these big days started off with very difficult times. Just by way of example, this coming Sunday will also be Rosh Chodesh Kislev, Sunday and Monday. And on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, we celebrate the Rebbe's good health. The joke always goes that if you feel your heart, Chas v'shalom, or if I feel my arm, then that's something wrong, because usually we're supposed to be healthy, and healthy we don't need to notice that somebody is healthy, it should just be. So if we say that we're celebrating the Rebbe's good health, that in itself already indicates that it was a story of not good health. And it's the story of the 19 Tafshin Lamed Ches, so it would be 78, 77 at the time it was the Rosh Hashanah, Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, where the Rebbe had a major heart attack in Shul. And it took until Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is almost 2 months, a month and a bit, to be able to come to the place where the Rebbe was finally able to leave his makeshift hospital room in 770 and go home for the first time. So it's a celebration of joy, but it's a celebration that comes off the back of a difficult, not explainable, not understandable, not appreciated hardship. Equally, you go down the line in the month of Kislev, there's the joy of the Mittler Rebbe, the first Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son, who was released from captivity in the Tsar's Russia, and generations earlier in the 19th of Kislev, similar, we have the celebration of where the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, and then you have the whole idea of Chafei Kislev, which is Hanukkah, which is a celebration of the Maccabees winning, but they won after a very difficult stretch in our history. Again, the same sort of idea where, although we are celebrating the highlights and remember those highlights, It's not because it was easy all the way through. It's actually the hardship that contrasts into the win, and therefore it becomes a reason to celebrate. So when we don't see the light, we have to remind ourselves that there is the beginning of the light. Be'ezras Hashem, we should see it very soon. And that when we come to Shabbos Mevarchim this month, it's going to bless the up and coming month, we must remind ourselves that it's a Shabbos of blessing. That's what Mevarchim actually means. It's the blessing, it's the week that is going to bless the upcoming month of Kislev. So it's a big deal. It happens to be there's another major highlight coming up this weekend, and that is that the Shabbos Mevarchim, the Shabbos before the month of Kislev, has in it, in recent years, an additional excitement. It's the weekend of the conference of the Rebbe's Shluchim from around the world. The Rebbe's Shluchim, who at the beginning started off locally, relatively speaking, where they spread out in different states of the United States of America, one or two here or there in Morocco, North Africa, and you had some in Europe, including London, and slowly it became more and more and more, and as it became more, it didn't only grow a little bit, but it compounded, and the growth brought additional growth to the extent where there are now much more shluchim who have become shluchim in the past 20 years, 30 years, than they were beforehand altogether. And it continues to grow at a rapid speed because the idea and the system that has been set up is made to work. The next generation, you now have shluchim who are third generation, filling the shoes, or where their parents fill the shoes of their grandparents. And this continues because shlichus is a lifelong mission, and in order to make sure that it stays fresh, the Rebbe instituted that there should be a conference of bringing people together. This weekend in 770, it'll be heaving with shluchim, and of course it'll be an additional strengthening of each other in the current times, and most importantly, strengthening each other to go back home and to continue to do what we do best, celebrate life, and continue to do best, do whatever it can, whichever mitzvah it can, to help bring Mashiach right away. So that's this weekend we have Shabbos Mevarchim. It's the month of Kislev. Plus it's also the Shabbos of Kinus HaShluchim, the gathering conference, gathering of the Shluchim, where they encourage each other and ourselves. And therefore we can draw from this excitement and this setting to be able to give ourselves an oomph and a boost, even if we're feeling a little under whatever else is going on. Hashem should give us the shkoyach. And let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the Parsha, because it's again a very loaded Parsha. It's a very exciting Parsha. And we're still in the book of Bereshis, so each parsha is loaded. I just want to point out that we started off the first one, Bereshis, not so long ago, talking about Adam. The next reading, Parshas Noach, which was just a few weeks ago still, was 10 generations later, Adam to Noach. And from Noach we have the next generation, or 10 generations later, the next hero, which is Avram Avinu, from Parshas Lech Lecha, Vayera, and beginning of Chayei Sarah, most of the Chayei Sarah, we focused on the life of Avraham Avinu, the first of the patriarchs, the founder of who brought back monotheism, and his wife Sarah, with all the ups and downs and the travels and the traverses that they went on. And that, in the end of last week's Sedra, we had where Avraham Avinu passes away at a ripe old age of 175. He's buried b'Seva Tova. He's buried by his two elder sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. Yishmael, by this time, already completely returned and repented to the good ways that his father had taught him. And this week's Sedra opens as Yitzchak is already married. Yitzchak is already married to his wife Rebecca. Last week's Sedra we spoke about this extensively, the mission of finding him the right shidduch. This week's Sedra opens up how Yitzchak and Rivka are now married 20 years. 20 years. And they're waiting and praying for children. They haven't had any children. Don't forget, Yitzchak's the only son. And his father had been promised that this son Yitzchak, would turn into a multitude, a massive nation that'll be so countless, just like the stars in the sky and the sand of the sea. So too, the children of Yitzchak will not be able to be counted. And here they are, his only child, the only child to his mother. And he hasn't had any children, been married for 20 years in davening. So the parsha opens up with Yitzchak and Rivka both davening to Hashem, pouring out the hearts, asking Hashem for a miracle, that they should be granted children. And Hashem hears their prayer. There is power in prayer. And Hashem hears Yitzchak's prayer, and they are blessed. Rivka becomes pregnant, and as she goes on with the pregnancy, turns out that it's not quite what she thought it would be. It's so difficult. The pregnancy is so extreme that she can't bear it anymore. And Rashi right away tells us what was so extreme about this pregnancy. All pregnancies are much more uncomfortable than life without pregnancy. And the answer is that she realized that there was a contradiction going on. She could actually feel the unborn baby itching to get out, kicking to get out, when she passed by a house of Kedusha, of holiness, a house of Torah study, which was a great feeling. She felt like she was connected. She felt like her baby was already growing in her ways. But then something would go wrong again when she passed by a house of idolatry or a house of unkosherness. She felt the same urge. This was driving her crazy. Says Rashi, the pain of uncomfortable and the pain of the biological growth of the baby was not so hard for her. What was much more hard was the fact that there was this contradiction in what the urges of her unborn baby was. And she was thinking to herself, am I having a baby that's going to be given a good education, yet leave it all behind? Where is this headed? What was I really praying for to bring a child into the world if it's a child that's not going to continue in the ways that we're going to educate him? And it really tormented her to the extent that she says, I need to seek godly counsel for this. And she went to the eldest sage of the time, Shem ben Noach, and she went to pour out her heart to him. And he answered her such a brilliant answer that answered the problem. Shnei goyim bevitnech. Actually, you don't have one child that's going to go in two places. You have two children which will each be drawn to their own path. And that's why you're feeling the urges when you go to a holy place. That's one of the unborn children. And the other urges is a different twin that will go the other way. But there'll be a time, there'll always be this play between the two of them, which one will be more effective, more successful. When one is successful, the other one won't. At the time came for birth, and Esau, the firstborn, the elder, was born first, and he was born looking much healthier. I think in modern day medicine, they would say it's quite common actually for one of the twins to take more blood from the placenta, from the mother, and therefore be redder and also be healthier and almost draining on the other twin. And it seems like, in a way, this is perhaps what it looked like, where Esau was born more complete, full of hair and fully grown, compared to Yaakov that was born second and seemed the weaker and the more frail of the two, but he was holding on to the heel of Esau. The older one, Esau, becomes a hunter as he grows up. Cunning hunter. You couldn't get a straight line out of the guy. And Yaakov, who wasn't the guy in the field, but was more the guy who sat back and a wholesome man, he would stay in the tents and learn. And he was the scholar of the two, the pious one of the two. And Yitzchak favors Esau, his outgoingness, his ability to be able to navigate the real world, whereas Rivka loves Yaakov. She understands what's going on as a mother can and realizes who's the real righteous amongst the two. And as the story goes, Avram Avinu, who was then 160 at the time of birth, when he turned 175, these newborns were already at the age of 15. The next highlight in the story is when Avram Avinu passes away. And Yaakov, the good kid, is cooking up a lentil soup to serve his father, who's now mourning the loss of their grandfather. And as he's cooking up this lentil soup, Esau comes home after a hunting trip, which was, as Rashi points out, was also a hunting trip, but didn't only hunt animals. He'd also started his new trend of making money through highway robbery. And he'd managed to get a good steal at the cost of murdering his prey. And he came home, he was tired, he was worn out. And as he comes in, this is the famous story where Yaakov Avinu is cooking the soup, and Esau is hungry and says to Yaakov, give me that soup. And Yaakov says, what are you going to give me for it? And they do a deal where Esau sells off his firstborn right for the exchange of the soup that Yaakov had made. Michra Karyoim, says, I don't want it to be just a jest. I want it to be a clear and obvious and consenting sale, which Esau agrees to. And the next highlight of the story is that after Esau had sold off his firstborn right to Yaakov, the whole family moves down to Gerar, the land of the Pelishtim. And it was at this place where Yitzchak did the same thing his father done with his mother. He presents his wife, Rivka, and says it's her sister. He was very concerned about the inhabitants of the land, lest they try and kill him, to take a liking, and they covet his wife. In order to stay safe, he calls it his sister, and he farms the land, in which that Avimelech, the king, tries to take Rivka, and Hashem does a nace to save her. But at that time also, although there was a famine, a year of not plenty in that entire region, Yitzchak's fields produced enormous amounts, 100 times the regular amount. It was considered anybody who got any little leftovers of Yitzchak's field was considered blessed, because his real estate, his agriculture, his farming was so successful beyond a reasonable amount. And that leads us also to the story of the wells, where Yitzchak would dig up wells in the same place as his father dug up, and each time it becomes a whole quarrel over who owns the well and the water supply, which obviously was very important in those times. And Yitzchak has again the whole strife between him and the Pelishtim, whose well it is, until eventually they come and make a deal. Avimelech comes to make a deal with him, seeing how successful he is, and they talk about the wells. And the name Be'er Sheva, which we have until this day, is the same name as the place where Avraham Avinu made an oath, and Yitzchak set aside 7 sheep as a sign, as that they have an agreement that the wells are actually his. And all this complaining and arguing about whether he or not he's the rightful owner was finally agreed upon, and they admitted that they had wronged him. The end of the story is that after this, Esau marries 2 Hittite women, and Yitzchak is looking, and as his sons grow older, and he himself isn't so young anymore, he was quite an elderly man as he gave birth to them, and he says to his older son, Esau, I'd like to give you a blessing as I grow older. Rashi points out that at this point, one of the reasons why he felt older was because his eyesight was going as well. And it was harder and harder for him to see. Rashi connected to the Akedah, different reasons. Hashem didn't want him to suffer from his son's idolatrous offerings that he was offering in the house. And Esau goes off to honor his father. One of the things that he had a tremendous mitzvah that Esau, we could even learn from him, how much he knew how to respect his father, Yitzchak. And Yitzchak just asked for him to prepare a meal. Esau went off right away to hunt and to get food to serve his father an honorable meal. And as he leaves, Rivka, who had overheard the conversation of the father telling the older son that he'd like to give him his blessings before he passes on, right away recognizes that these blessings are not just a good wish. These are going to be the handing over of the ability, the power of blessing that Avraham had received from Hashem, and Avraham had given over to his son Yitzchak, and were about to be given over into the hands of Esau. And she knew Esau very well. She also knew Yaakov. She knew that Esau wouldn't use these blessings for anything meaningful. Instead, he'd try and use it to further his own selfishness and his own pursuit of his own agenda. And therefore, she runs the risk, and she decides she's going to try and get Yaakov to somehow outsmart both Esau and father Yitzchak to be able to get the blessings, which they do as a joint effort. She gets Yaakov to dress up in the fur clothing that Esau had left in her house, and to walk into the father Yitzchak's room, masquerading as if he is the older brother Esau. She personally prepares the meal for him, and Yaakov, in a short while, is walking into Yitzchak's room with great trepidation. He's trying to deceive his father after the exact instructions of his mother, and to outsmart Esav by getting the brachas from the father. And as the story goes, Yaakov walks in and he uses the wording that Esav would never do. He talks about blessing Hashem and he's grateful and he speaks politely, and Yaakov is speaking like him. And father says, you feel like Esav, but you talk like Yaakov. Father eats from the food and he gives Yaakov the most gorgeous brachas, brachas, blessings of prosperity, brachas of being able to have the upper hand over his brother, and many other brachas. And as Yaakov picks himself up to leave out of the room, he narrowly misses Esav, who comes in yelling at his father, come on, stand up, I brought you food. Please, bless me as you said. And that's when Yitzchak realizes, hey, 1 second, someone's just been in here. Who are you? And Esav realizes what happens, and he cries. However much of a gangster he was, he knew how precious the brachas from Yaakov would be. And he cries. He says, Father, do you not have another bracha for me too? He complains that Yaakov had deceived him twice. Once he had deceived him and he had made him agree to sell his firstborn rights, and now he's deceived him again. At which point Father says, so you've sold your firstborn rights. In that case, I gave the brachas to the right one, because if he owns the rights, then he deserves to have his. And that's exactly what happens. He says, Gam Baruch here. The end of the parsha is that Esav is fuming, seething. He wants to kill his twin brother. And Yaakov has to run. Who's going to tell him? Father and mother, Rivka and Yitzchak, call in Yaakov, and they say to him, we don't want you to marry locally to local girls. Do what my father did. Go out and find a wife from the family out there in Haran. So travel to your mother's brother, Uncle Lavan, and spend time there, and that's where you'll find your match. The story starts off with telling how he leaves, and when Esav sees how their father and mother had asked his younger brother not to marry, but to marry only within the family, he takes himself a third wife from in the family, from the daughters of Yishmael, in order to try and make it look like he was doing the right thing. This is the summary of the Parshah's Toldos. This Parshah's Toldos has in it some fascinating angles, starting off with the very name of the Parsha. The word Toldos actually means the descendants, the future generations. It's not the first time the Torah uses this word, but this Parsha becomes a living lesson for how to educate children, how to educate the next generation, and we're going to use that as our way in to the Parsha's discussion. If you have a look at the screen, and here we have a picture, and this picture is supposed to be of a child who is misbehaving. Let's just say misbehaving, acting out. So the mother's on the phone, and the kid is not waiting patiently, to say the least. If you look closely, she's actually making a lot of noise. The mother's squinting and trying to get a little bit last few moments on the conversation. And the question on the screen is, what would you advise? What would you say to a parent who's struggling with a child that is misbehaving, acting out, not just as a one-off, perhaps this is an ongoing, regular occurrence? Any advice would be much appreciated. Talking about Toldos and future generations. Please.
Put the phone away. Put the phone away. Put the phone away. And pay attention to your child, because maybe that's why she's misbehaving. Because maybe she hasn't got enough of mummy's time, because mummy's too busy conversing with somebody else when her daughter.
First piece of advice is, Mummy, you're wrong. The kid is right. That's definitely a great piece of advice. Okay. Put the phone away. Anyone else? Anyone consider that perhaps sometimes kids misbehave even if the mummy's not on the phone?
Well, that's the nature of children.
The nature of children is to misbehave?
No, the nature of children's... Oh, what are you twisting my words for? The nature of a child sometimes, or even an adult, is not to behave. But in the case of a child, the parents and teachers are there to educate them to do the right thing. And when a person's a bit older and they don't do the right thing, it's to be hoped that there's somebody there who will help them. So everybody sometimes misbehaves to the smallest amount or the largest amount.
Oh,
It's not, it's
oh,
not
I like it. I like what we're saying. So the fact that a kid's misbehaving doesn't mean that they're a bad kid. The fact
of
that they're
course not.
misbehaving, we all do.
There's no bad children
Oh, oh, now we're
ever.
getting it. This is a good piece of advice. There's no bad children, and there's no bad
No.
mummies either. I mean, maybe there are, but let's just say this. Let's just say, turn up the heat on the question. Imagine this mother has two kids. She's on the bench. Right, sitting next to her is her other daughter, who's sitting patiently.
How would her other daughter know? She's only turning round on the phone. How do we know there's another child there?
I'm making the story up. Let's just say
Oh,
this mother has two daughters. Imagine, I'm stretching the question. One daughter is yelling, and one daughter is sitting patiently. And the mother's thinking, why is it that one kid is okay, and one kid is just literally off the walls? What would you tell the mother that has twins that one of them is off the walls and one of them's not?
a mother would know that. A mother knows when one child is behaving differently to another child, and particularly in the case of twins, where you may expect twins sometimes will speak to each other in their own language or play with each other. But because they're twins, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do that. They're still two individual children.
Absolutely.
And so the behavior must be taken as each child, two children. You can't always say the twins do this or the twins should do that. No, this child or that child. They're two children.
Wow, you make a great mother, grandmother, teacher.
I wish
I
I
like
did.
it. I need to hear
I
more
wish
of this. My twins will be very happy with what you just said. Hold on a
Your
second.
twins
Come
are
here.
wonderful.
Well, I think it's the phone, I've started to get a phobia about people and phones, and it's the age group as well. And I have to agree with Rochelle, because usually when a child is you're trying to do something and a child is constantly at you, it's because they've got nothing to do. They're bored sometimes.
I'm outnumbered and outgunned. What can I tell you?
They might have a challenging behaviour, and if they do have a challenging behaviour where they can't control that, then you have to find a form of discipline to help them over it.
That is well
Being on the
worded.
phone, like Rochelle says, does not help the situation, does it?
Okay. I rest my case. I want to share a story. You know what? The point is very well taken. I do want to say you worded that very well. We have discipline to help them get over it, rather than to help me be able to get back on my phone. I need to have discipline to be able to make sure that my children grow, and that's very important. I just want to share one story, and then we're going to jump right into this week's Parshah. The story is a story about the dollar line, I think it was. Maybe it was the Kosher Bracha. The Rebbe was giving out something to thousands of people, and there was a very long line. And it would have been a book. The Rebbe was handing out booklets, I think it was a Tanya, that particular amount of time. And there was a father and a young child who had come by, and each one of them had received from the Rebbe. The Rebbe had given them a Tanya with a bracha, and they were stood at the side watching people go by. And as the child's waiting for his father, the child's playing with the Tanya, which is a holy book, but he's just rolling it down his knees. I think he was flipping it over, this, that, and the other. And the Rebbe notices from the corner of the eye, and he sees this kid who's literally disrespecting the Tanya, the book, that it was so important for the Rebbe to give it out, hand each one to each person. That's how special it is. And here's this kid disrespecting it. In the corner of the Rebbe sees it, and he can't stop the line. People are coming. He turns to one of the helpers, to Rabbi Klein, and he says to him, "Do you have something that you could give to this child so you could play with it?" And the story goes, Rabbi Klein had nothing on him. The only thing he had was his ring of keys. He grabbed his keys, and the Rebbe said he should give him something. He was going to give him. So the Rebbe said, "Don't worry, you don't have to give him your keys. It's okay. Your keys you can hold on to. You don't have. But the concept that if the kid's misbehaving is because he doesn't have what to do. And if you can provide him something to do, something that's 10 out of 10. So that's the story of when sometimes it seems like the kid's misbehaving, but really the kid's not. So maybe the picture on the screen is the wrong picture. Because I was looking for a case where we have something that there are certain children that have a tendency to be more, the word is provocative, but they have a harder time sitting still, a harder time following directions, a harder time of behaving right than other children. And there are children who have an easier time. They're just born to, you tell them what to do and they do it. Is this true?
Yes and no.
Oh,
Sometimes,
tell me more.
these days, sometimes if a child won't do what they're told or doesn't want to sit still, they often get labelled very quickly with something. But that something could just be that nobody is listening to them and that they need a little bit more attention and a little bit more sitting down and less going out and doing everything social, and maybe being at home with daddy and mummy is more important than what they're doing. And maybe then there may be less labels and not more labels, because years ago children didn't have labels for that kind of behaviour, and somehow they've managed to grow up and be adults in their own right. These days we are very quick to label everything, because does it make it any easier? No, it means you just schlep them from one place to another. Just give them some time. Be a family. That's what it's about. It's okay interesting children, but you have to then bring them up. So do the best you can do. And that's not being on the phone.
I'm switching the picture right away. I don't want to see the picture of the person on the phone at all. 1 second. But having said that, besides I think the point you make is very, very important to remind ourselves, especially as you said in today's day and age, where we are so quick to label people. And in a sense, it's almost like writing people off, chas v'shalom, which is obviously not a good tendency to have. And it's not honest. Because as you said, if we were to spend a bit more time with them, if we could find, or we could create, or we could make sure that time was sacred, then a lot of the labeling would go out the window. But having said all that, there is an element that some children naturally are drawn to be goody-goodies, and some children are naturally going to just have a good time. Not because they're evil, just because they love life. And they're out and about, and they're going to find the next excitement. And if that excitement could be something good, it might take a little bit more effort, but then they would be invested in that. So what we are going to talk about is, when we honestly have a difference in two sorts of children, what can we look at in this week's Parshah to give us a better insight into do that? And just to make it a little more safe, or less safe, but a little more personal, we have that sort of tendency in our own self as well. There are areas in our life in which we naturally are drawn towards doing what's right. Perhaps because we had some good experiences as children, our parents had a lot of time for us when we learned those ideas. Or maybe it's because when we do them, we find personal, rewarding feelings that come with that sort of goodness that we do. There are other areas in our personal life that have the exact opposite reality. When we are told it's now time to do this, that, and the other, I'm like, oh man, do we really have to do that? Is there anything is there any phone calls I can take right now? Is there anywhere else I can go to distract myself? And that is within me, within my own self. So almost like we have the two sides, the two children within us. And we're going to discuss these twins, these Yaakov and Esav elements, the way they find themselves in our life. And we're going to borrow the concept that this Parsha opens up with these two unborn twins, as in they were both still within Rivka's womb, and she felt drawn one way and the other way. And we're going to kind of play with that as a message of how we can look at ourselves. And then what we're going to say is that perhaps the same way we would like to deal with these realities within our own self, we don't write ourselves off, at least we shouldn't. We try and work with ourselves. And we're going to learn that the Rebbe is going to tell us, don't just work with myself, acknowledge and recognize the greatness, the power, the advantage in the jumpy kid, in the side of me that's itching to just go and indulge. Because that has in it such greatness that the Yaakov inside me doesn't have. And that's where we're going to go. Let's start off with an observation. Remember we said we're doing Rashi this year. We're going to look at a pasuk. We're going to look at the Rashi. We're going to name one question, one or two questions, and then when we learn the answer, we're going to be better positioned to circle back to getting to the advice that the Torah wants us to know, how to work with our own Esav. And from that also with perhaps a child who has that sort of tendency. So here's the quote from this week's Parshah. The verse reads, "And her days to give birth were completed, and behold, there were twins in her womb." Okay. So she was told by the prophet that she was going to have twins, and behold, there were twins in her womb. The prophecy was fulfilled. There were two healthy children born. What's the first half, though? What's the first half of this passage telling us? Her days to give birth were completed. What does that mean? She had a successful birth. I mean, how would you understand V'yimnu yameha laleres, her days to give birth were completed?
That she'd gone through the 9 months of pregnancy. So that
On full term.
Born. Yeah.
Yeah, which is not always that common with twins.
No,
Not
it
always
isn't.
that common with twins, but it does happen.
No,
It does happen. I'll tell you firsthand. It does happen. Baruch Hashem. Our twins went full term, and that was special. V'yimlu yameh laleres, however, says Rashi, her days were completed. Rashi contrasts this quote with a different set of twins that we're going to learn about in a few sedras to come. They were also born in the biblical twins, and they become the great-great-grandparents of David HaMelech. And this is the story of Tamar and Yehuda.
Oh.
There, however, sorry?
No, I said yes. Tamar, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The passage phrases it differently. Instead of saying, and her days were completed, there it says it came about when she gave birth. And behold, there were twins in her womb. So the end of that verse, the end of that quote is exactly the same. Behold, there were twins in her womb. But the beginning doesn't say her days were completed. It says it came about when she gave birth. Says Rashi, why is it that in our Sedra, the Torah wants to tell us the days were completed, and there it doesn't say that? Because that's exactly what happened. This is because Tamar's pregnancy term was not filled. She didn't go full term. She gave birth to them after 7 months. Now, I do want to say, this sounds like a classic conversation two mothers might have. Oh, when we all born, how far did you get in your pregnancy with your twins? And how far did you get? Great. It makes a great conversation. But we're talking about the Torah. And we're talking about Rashi. And Rashi's telling us that the wording in the Torah was changed up so that we should know who went full term and who didn't go full term. I mean, if you had two guys in yeshiva discussing whether their mother went full term or not, I don't know how comfortable that would be in such a conversation. Like, it's not the kind of thing that you would expect to find in the books. But here it's not only in the books, but Rashi wants us to notice the change in the language so that we should know who went full term and who didn't. And therefore the question is going to be, why would that be relevant? Any suggestions?
Is it because sometimes if a twin or a child is not full term, that child could have some problems which you are not aware of, and those are the things that come out later which would make us think that the child is reckless and not doing the right thing, in spite of everything the parents may do for the child.
Wow, that's a very interesting idea. I haven't thought of that before, but the Torah might be telling us to notice factors that might have slipped beneath the radar, but if you put the bigger picture in, this might help us appreciate maybe the challenge that this child might be going through just because it hasn't gone full term. Interesting angle. Okay, it's not what I was thinking of. We might go back to that, but let's hold on to that one. Anyone else? Still, you want to weigh in this one?
Because premature twins or premature babies are well known to have development issues, and
let's just say present company excluded. I think I was premature, but go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah. And also, it's like, because she had the pregnancy at 7 months, right? She wasn't pregnant long enough to get the feelings that the other mother had. So the pregnancy finished a lot sooner, so she didn't have that pulling and tugging, where the other mother who completed the pregnancy to full term had different feelings.
Great.
Because of the last 2 months of development in the womb are very rapid.
Yeah, And they're much bigger. They're much more advanced then.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's two great angles. Shkoyach. Thank you. So we've got, number one is just to be aware of the development the challenges that might have come about from a short-term pregnancy, but also to notice that maybe the reason why she had those urges was because they came further. We're going to move on to how Rashi explains another interesting difference. If you notice in the Hebrew, there are two words in bold. These two words actually mean the same thing, but there are more letters in the second one over the first one. The letter Aleph is missing in the first quote. V'nei toimim chasar, over Tamar ta'imim male. There were twins in a womb, toimim, without the Aleph. The word for twins is spelt defectively, missing an Aleph and a Yod. Tamar's twins are described as ta'imim, with the complete spelling, including the Aleph and the Yod. This is, says Rashi, because Tamar's twins, who went not full term, were both righteous. Peret and Zorach were both very well-behaved children. But in this case, the case of Yaakov and Esav, he doesn't say ta'imim. It's spelt defectively because one was virtuous and one was wicked. So, we get a general idea, it makes sense, that somehow the development of these children followed the difference of their term, which would explain why the Torah might make an emphasis of notifying us which went full term or which didn't. But when you slow down and when you think about it for a second, it seems the opposite. The one which went full term had the conflicting kids, whereas the one which went shorter term becomes the defective one, where one is righteous and one isn't. Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay, so we're asking ourselves, let's get the next one here. Complete 9 months, one righteous, one wicked. The incomplete, which is a 7 month, is both righteous. Okay, this is how Rashi explains it. And the Rebbe wants us to understand, to really recognize that the more righteous the children, the shorter the pregnancy. Is that this quote here? This is a quote from Tzedel Derech. The reason is simple. God hastened to bring two righteous people to the world. So, to put it simply, there's a standard pregnancy time rate. It's supposed to be 9 months. But when the children are so righteous, Hashem says, hold on a second, I can't wait to get these kids into the world. Let's high speed it. And because there's two righteous souls waiting to break out, if you like, the Hashem hastened their delivery so that they were delivered only after 7 months. Compared to the ones which ones are going to be righteous and one not. So that wasn't such a rush to get them. Won't let them go. The regular term is, it seems like the Tzedel Derech wants to say. However, this is a simple commentary. Before we get to Chassidus, and Chassidus is going to take this, put it on its head. And this is where we're going to learn our lessons from what it means to deal with and to appreciate and to work on a child who has urges to behave like Esav, those urges to go the other way. So the way the question is framed on this Rashi, number one is, why are we painting a full-term pregnancy as a negative thing? It's almost like if a baby is born on full term, then Hashem wasn't rushing to have them in the world, and he let them go. Eventually came the time, so they came up. Really? Full-time pregnancy? That means that the mother nurtured the child to its fullest. Isn't that a good thing? Number one. Number two, how is it fair that Tamar's righteous children were born as preemies, yet the wicked Esav enjoyed 9 whole months of development? I guess it's the same question on the other way.
Well,
If good, sorry?
maybe there's an answer here. If twins or a baby is born prematurely, that means that the mother has to spend much more time with the child. And although they come out early, she actually has to develop them herself. And that may be the time when everything is that there's that bone that's there because the mother has spent so much more time with them and has had to because of their premature birth.
I love it. You know what?
Yeah, and in a full-term pregnancy, right, you could over-nurture a child.
Hold on, now you're blowing my top. Over nurturing. Let's hold our thought for a second. 1 second. I tell you why. Just before I forget this, I should probably say it later, but I'm going to say it now. What Mrs. Abrams just said is that the mother, once the baby's born, it's spending time with the child herself. I'm just going to rephrase that. The mother spending her own time with the child throughout the pregnancy as well. However, once the child's born, the mother's spending her time with the baby itself.
Yeah.
Now the baby is also consciously taking in, chewing over, considering as its own individual the mother's education, the mother's input, and the mother's nurture. And that's going to be very relevant. And perhaps over nurturing, in this case, when you have a born child, you get feedback. Not that I think biologically it probably happens in the womb also. The mother's taking feedback from the child. So I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but over nurturing in Chassidus is a non-issue. You could have malnurturing, where I think I'm giving something good, but really it's not over nurturing. I think I'm over nurturing. Really, I'm giving the wrong nurture. But let's just assume that Rivka was a good mother. I think it's a safe thing to do. She was one of the matriarchs. She was the second matriarch of our history. But she certainly gave the children her very best. But we're going to talk about why we think full pregnancy seems to be less than a positive thing, and that the Esau enjoyed 9 whole months of development compared to Tamar's children. And one last question, considering the background stories. This is where it's really exciting. Yitzchak and Rivka were so holy about how they went about their personal life, their intimate life. They were such special people. Yitzchak was the one who was on the Akedah, who his father had trained personally to the extent where he said he can't even leave the Holy Land. And Rivka was the one who turned around to her family and said, even if you don't let me go, I'm not staying here, I'm going to a holier place. And from this holy union, we end up getting children where one is righteous and one is an Esau. Compared to the story of Yehuda and Tamar, when we get to that Parshah, we'll talk more about it, but it was, to say the least, a little sketchy. Yehuda had a daughter-in-law called Tamar. She married his first son, who died, and as a levirate marriage, married his second son, who also died, and eventually, at the third son was too young, she orchestrated to get pregnant with Yehuda. Yet her children are so righteous. How does it stack up? So this is all the questions that these are the questions that the Rebbe asks amongst all the other questions that he asks. And the one answer is going to answer all these questions. Rashi is telling us, Rashi is teaching us that we should recognize that although Esau behaved wickedly, Esau was the expression. He carried the potential and the opportunity that the best Yaakov would ever be could never amount to what Esau could be. Or in the context of talking here, that Tamar's 2 righteous children were the goody-goodies. And to be a goody-goody is great. But what Esau can achieve is much, much more than that. Unfortunately, Esau made bad choices. However, it doesn't take away from what we have to, as parents, as educators, as people that educate ourselves, it doesn't have to take away of how we should look at what we might call a challenge called Esau. It shouldn't be a problem. Go ahead, Sylvia, go, I'm listening.
It's their souls.
It is their souls.
Yeah,
we're talking not just souls, we're talking personality.
Well, does your soul create your personality as well? Or part of it? Can you separate the personality from the soul?
I'm going to say there are 2 souls in every person.
Yeah.
And the choice of which one should be dominant, which one should be in the driver's seat, is a choice that we make. But the souls are different. You can have an Esau soul, which has a lot of passion, a lot of impulse and urges. You can have a simple soul, a Yaakov soul. But both Yaakov and Esav are going to have conflicting sides and will have to be making choices. And what we're learning here is that when Esav makes the right choices, he is far ahead than when Yaakov makes the right choices. Unfortunately, the other way around as well. When Yaakov makes a bad choice, how far does he go? Compared to when Esav makes a bad choice, he goes way off the beaten track. And just to put it in a story format, and then we'll learn how it answers our questions and gives us a lesson. It's a beautiful story. I believe it was of the Tzemach Tzedek, who when one of his students, one of his Talmidim, one of his Hasidim, came to him really, really distraught. His son was a genius of a kid, really studying hard, but he had a great mind. I mean, he found that either his teachers didn't respect him enough, or he got into a debate with certain kids, and basically he left it. He left studying Torah and ended up joining all sorts of not holy. I think he went to join the church, and he was studying, and he would gone off Yiddishkeit, and he felt like that's where he found respect. People appreciated his wisdom. People spoke nicely to him. Compared to the Torah academies, people didn't quite appreciate his depth. And as the story goes, the Tzemach Tzedek, whoever it was, said to the father, just let him come and meet me. Let me have a conversation with him. Eventually he gets to talk to him, and he says to him, look, why don't you go and speak to him, because you're a genius of a boy. You deserve to have at least a conversation with somebody who's also a very great man. And as he comes in, he tells him a whole anecdote of a story. He says, which is better, a strong horse or a weak horse? And the boy says, of course, strong horse is much better. I mean, it's simple. He says, yeah, but if the weak horse and the strong horse have a race, then the strong horse wins. But that's providing they both go on the beaten track. But if they get lost, so in the weak horse, how far can it get lost? Only a little bit. Compared to the strong horse, it goes further and further down the wrong path. It's going to be lost much, much more. So the kid's got a sharp mind. He says, yeah, well, that's as long as they don't run away. The minute you tell them the way back, the weak horse is going to take much longer to get back on path, whereas the strong horse will come racing back on. And the Rebbe then says to him, so for the strong horse, as soon as it knows that it's made a mistake and goes back onto the path, it comes racing back on. It didn't say another word. And it dawned on the kid what the Rebbe is telling him. And that itself, the faith that the Rebbe had in this particular individual, who made some really nasty, bad choices, un-Jewish choices, hearing the Rebbe tell him that he believes that if he gets back on track, he'll be straight on them, straight and narrow in no time, that itself, that confidence gave the child the hope and the desire to make that change. Why? Because the education was tailored to his reality. And indeed, this child went on to become a very, very successful, much more so than perhaps somebody who wasn't didn't have such experiences. We're going to say that the Esav and the Yaakov in our Sedra, similar sort of idea. Yaakov and Esav were born at full term, but they were full term because Esav was being geared up. Geared up with what? With much more additional intuition, inbuilt blessings that would allow him to be able to overcome some of the difficulties that he would face. This becomes maybe one of the famous lines of the Rebbe, in which he insisted in not calling handicapped people or the handicapped soldiers handicapped. He would call them special souls. Nowadays, there are many organizations that are taking this on, special spirits, special ed. This has become much, much more the norm. But in those days, in the 60s and the 70s, where the Rebbe was talking about this, it was far from regular. And the Rebbe said, don't just call them special because you hope they're going to be special. Recognize that if Hashem has trusted them with this sort of challenge, it must be because Hashem has given to them the strength and the spirit to be able to deal with that. And that's an example of someone who's got a physical or a mental handicap. But if you have a question, who is more virtuous between the two? The person who can ride a bike rally and the guy in this picture? Certainly, the person who puts in the effort to rein it in will go much further. This is a quote from the Ram. I'm telling us, before Hashem gives us a challenge, He equips us with the ability to overcome it. Says the Sikha. Remember we asked, why does the Torah tell us who went full term and who doesn't go full term? Are we really supposed to be writing that in the book? I mean, you want to have a chit chat with your fellow woman, that's fine. But in the Torah, what's the message? Says the Rebbe, this is exactly the message. Esav and Yaakov, their pregnancy needed more attention. They needed to fuel up more. Because what Esau was going to get out to do was going to be the ability to turn and to rein in a beast that could go off the beaten track, but if it's reined in with this investment, it will be stronger and better than ever. And therefore their pregnancy had to go full term. And although it didn't work out that way, in actuality, we are told when Mashiach comes, at the time of the redemption, the children of Esau will also be redeemed. And that's actually what Yaakov says to his brother next week, Sedra, I will meet you at Seir in the time to come. But what does it mean to us? What's the messaging for us? Now, if we see a child who has a harder time reining it in, don't be kind to them despite their challenge. Don't have Rahmanas on them that they have a hard time. I mean, Rahmanas is not a bad thing. But that shouldn't be instead of recognizing that Hashem has designed this child with such enormous potential, with such enormous strength, that the regular system, if you like, the regular box that schools might try to fit people into, what the social norms consider the right thing, just don't do it for this kid. They're designed to be much more than that. They'll need extra work. They'll need extra nurturing. Not because they're a bigger problem, but because this is where the potential for enormous goodness lies. And Esav and Yaakov don't become the good guy and the bad guy. Yaakov becomes the goody-goody. Esav is the maverick, creative, super opportunity person or side of me that I need to nurture. So Yaakov is a great kid. He just gets it right. But it is what it is. And it won't ever push beyond that. And when there's that kid who is yelling on the phone, it might be the one kid who will educate the mother to stop using the cell phone so much. Maybe. Good things can come out of it. This is the idea. The idea is that we have to remind ourselves, the Torah wants us to know that the Esav pregnancy had to go with a full-term investment with additional nurturing from the holiest union of Yaakov, Yitzchak and Rivka, unlike the Tamar story, because this is what it would take to help them be successful. And even if it hasn't happened yet, we continue trying to live up to that. So we're learning something about ourselves, about those around us, and Hashem should give us the koyach to be able to be true to that potential, to unravel it, unpack it, and put it into practice. It should carry us through in a way that we could never imagine, and continue doing good things day in, day out, with the strength and the passion that only Esav could bring to the table. Thank you very much, everybody. Next Monday, we won't be on. I don't think next Monday we're not going to be on, just the Kinus weekend. But Be'ez Hashem, all being well, the following Monday we should be back on, and that will already be in the month of Kislev. And I wish everybody a good week, a week full of good news, a good Shabbos Mavarchim, a good Chodesh, and all the best brachas to you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and see you Wednesday.
Wednesday, all being well. Yes. Look after yourself. Take care.
Rabbi Cohen, you could always
Yes.
say that the people who work in a school where the children need a little bit more help, that they have pure neshamas, and we should be blessed and we should honor those every single day. That's what it's all about.
And the Rebbe will tell us that not only have they pure neshamas, they are the purest neshamas.
Yeah.
Shkoyach.
Yeah.